So good morning, everybody. Gertrud Barwick is presenting today, and we thank you very, very much for being here, and I will leave it up to you. This is your show.
First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for being here. It's so much fun to see faces that I haven't seen many years ago. And I'm very honored to be here today because it is International Women's Day, and for some reason I'm here to represent all the women in the world. Yes. Fighting women. So I was born in the northern part of Germany. I brought you a map of Germany so that you can see, and this is now from World War I, but I didn't have another map. But all the pink part is Germany, and in those days, in the beginning of the war, all this here belonged to Germany, which is now all part of Russia and Poland. But everything from here on, it's Austria, it's Italy down here, you have France, you have Belgium, you have Holland, and up here is Denmark. So I was born way up here, about 1 hour south of the Danish border. So we are the only ones in Germany who have water on each side. Otherwise, Germany has no water anywhere on any border. So we had a lot of wind, but we had very little snow. So I was born in 1931, makes me now 91 years old.
Jeez.
And yeah, I'm happy, and I hope so that I remember what I want to remember, but we will see. My father was, first of all, I was born in a very tiny town, and I have an old picture of that tiny town. It was built probably around the 1600s, but it was very small. It had a beautiful center of the city where all the roads would come out, and we had a cloister which was at the edge of our town, and we had a Protestant church, and in the cloister was the Catholic Church. So this little road here that you can look at later on is the road to the cloister. So my father was in this little town, and I don't really recall how many people there were, maybe 1,000 people at the time. My father was the only doctor in this town. And my father came from a family from the Rhine Valley, which is over on this side, where the Rhine, you know, the River Rhine, you're all familiar with that. Yeah. And my mom came from right up here. So my father was the oldest son from a very Catholic family. And in those days, all your firstborn sons had to go into the priesthood. So my father was destined to go into the priesthood, and after he had to should take his vows to be a priest, he said, I can't do this. And so from the religion part, then he went into medicine and became a great doctor, where he could not help with medicine, he could help spiritually. My mother came from a family of 12 children because she lived on a farm. And in those days, you know, the late 1800s, everyone had farm or something where you needed a lot of help. And so it was, there was a widow who had 4 children, who married a widower who had 3 children. And then they had another 3 or 4 together. And so my mom was the last one of that big crowd of people. She grew up on this farm, but then she escaped the farm, and I give her great credit and great honor to my mother. She left the farm, she went into the big city of Kiel, which is close to where I come from. And Kiel had tons of schools, it had operas, it had everything you were looking for. And also had a huge harbor. You probably all know about the great sailboats that came through Kiel. So the two of them got together, and one day I came along. Just so here I am. The problem being the only child of the doctor in the small, the priest and the pastor and the doctor and the lawyer and the Norway post officer. And so in those days, really all these things were very important. When I was about 5, my mom sent me to the nuns. So normally the cloister would not open for anything. There was a big wall in front of it. It was this tiny hole, maybe the size of my paper. And you want to enter the cloister, then there was a nun behind that little door, and she would open up and she said, "Who are you? What are you?" So it was a very restricted kind of area, but they opened up for 1 day a week, and all us little children, we would go and they would teach us sewing, embroidery, knitting, crocheting, and all sorts of the beautiful things, for me, beautiful things in life. And so we learned a lot. I had maybe 2, 3 friends at the time. One of these children had a father who was the caretaker of the gym hall and the elementary school. And I have a picture here. You can look at it later on. It's our gym hall, which looks almost like a castle, but it's the gym hall. And so in the winter time, we had the whole gym to ourselves to play with. On the upstairs in the summertime, there was like a hostel, and people who came on bikes or on, very few people had cars, mostly on bikes or walking. They would stay there upstairs in the hostel in the summertime, but in the winter it was our playground. And we had our doll houses there, and we could run and play and do all whatever we wanted. What it did for me was that I now had a whole space downstairs where I could experience all the apparatuses in the gym. The high bars, the low bars, the parallel bars, the horses, you name it. And so from a very little girls on, I started playing around with all these things. And eventually, when I became a teenager, I was really in competition with a lot of swimmers. So that was my big thing. Christmas for me was probably the most magic thing in Germany at the time. When you are a little child, everything is magic, but Christmas was especially magic. The church bell would ring all night long from about 4 in the afternoon to, I don't know, it was midnight or 9. But in those days, we didn't have electric lights, we had no telephones, we had no computers, we had no television. So Christmas was a very special time. And we had a fairly big house. Here's my house. And at about 4 weeks before Christmas, the door to the living room was always closed. Because Christmas was a magic time. It was not like today where you buy tons of presents and lift up your rooms for 6 weeks before Christmas. The door was locked to the living room, and it only opened on Christmas Eve. And all the people that worked for my father, the chauffeur's children, the maid's children, whoever was working there, they were all there. And so with the bells of the church, the doors would open wide, and there was this Christmas tree, I can still see it today. And it had real lights and real candles, and it was very festive. It always stays with me. All the children now have to say a poem. You had to go in front of the tree and you had to read or write or say a poem. And after that, we were allowed to have our presents. Now, presents in those days were not like today. Presents at those days, if you had an orange and you had an apple and you had maybe a doll, or you're all a little older, so it was a special time. It was a moving time. It was a spiritual time. My father was very special in one way, because when he had patients where the mother was very ill, he would bring the children into our house. And my mom and whoever was there was looking after the children until the mother was better again. And the other thing we had was what in German we called Ferienkinder. These were children that came from poorer area, and they would stay with us for the summer holidays. And so my mom would feed them and teach them little things. And so that was a holiday for these children. They were called Ferienkinder. I remember that maybe. So it was a good childhood. Then in 1939, as you all know, that horrible war started. And because, most people had no television, no one had television, but very few people also had no telephone. Telephones were in the post office, telephone was with the church and the lawyer and the doctor. And so I remember so well that people would come to our house, and at the front door, there was a pipe, maybe the size of this. It went up to the second floor where my father had his office. And if people came out of time where it was open for patients to come, they would blow into this thing. There was a plug that they would blow in, and upstairs where my father was, the plug would fall out, and he would know somebody was there who needed it. Because no phone, remember, no phone. Yeah. And the other thing was funny for me is that our chauffeur lived on the next house. So they had to communicate all the time. And there was this line from my father's room to the chauffeur's bedroom, was some electrical line that zig when they had to come and help. So that is my remembrance. So in 1939, as I said, the war breaks out, and my father is asked to go into war and helps the soldiers who are damaged in hospitals and field hospitals. And unfortunately, he died shortly after that. I was 10 years old at the time. Most of the children in Germany who were in the areas where there were a lot of bombing, they were sent away to different countries. And my mother said at this point, there's no way I'm going to send you away, because it's the only thing we have now, it's you and I. And the war started more. In the beginning, the war started on the west side. But then slowly, when the Russians came into the war, everything from the east, Russia is over here, everything from here, these people had to evacuate their homes. And in German, you call them Flüchtlinge. They're refugees who come from this part of the world, and they came to us. And because my mother and I are both female, we were both allowed one room in the house. So we had to share the room, and all the other space in the house was given to the refugees at the time. So we shared the kitchen and the bathroom and everything else that we have.
How many refugees did you have in the house?
Oh, we had some on the third floor, we had some, you know, we were kept the living room, the dining room, where the refugees were, the bedroom, and on the second floor as well. The third floor.
So it wasn't just a few people.
No, it was a lot of people at the time. Yeah. So, when the war progressed, and here is that big city from where I come from, was a city that they made the U-boats. And the U-boats now, you know, there was a big danger in the sea. And so the bombs fell non-stop now on Kiev. And from that time on, the war for us became a total reality. And my mother had made in the garden a big hole in the garden, and she took a big crate, probably the size of the table. And she made this hole, put this crate in, and all her precious things that she had from her parents or that she had collected over the time, she would put into this crate, and it was put in the ground to save it so that the bombs would not destroy it. And so after that, I would say I spent probably at least a year and a half underground. We never came out, the bombs were just falling all the time. If you see pictures now of Ukraine, that is exactly what it looked like. And there's nowhere you can run to, you know, there's no safe place, you just. So finally, the war ended, my father gone, my mom and I fighting on. And before the Allies decided which part of Germany would become either Russian or British or French or USA, we really had no food. Nobody knew what to do with us. We had no coal to heat the house, nothing. So my mom knew some farmers who lived in the neighborhood who had been patients of my father. And we would walk. My mom and I, there were no cars, of course. My mom and I would walk 10, 15 kilometers to the next farmer, and he would feed us for the day. And then we would go home, each of us with bottles of milk. And we also had little rakes like we use now in our garden with the flowers, but we had little rakes like that. And we would go through the fields and raked around to see if there were any potatoes or carrots or anything, root vegetable left in the ground. So that is how we survived. I don't know if I mentioned, but I was standing in the middle of the road when the British tankers rolled in and scared us to death. Unfortunately, you know, I can't change the war, but I can tell you that the German people are not bad people. You know, it's unfortunate. It's the same in Russia right now. You know, it's a powerhouse. Somebody wants the power, but it's the people who are the sufferers. So after the war, now we had, you know, we were all growing. So our clothes was now like this, and we were like this. And there were no stores where you could buy anything. So what they created was exchange store. So for now that my father had passed away, we had all my father's clothes. And so we would bring a pair of shoes from my father to this exchange store and would ask for a pair of shoes that would fit me. And so that is how I had a pair of shoes to wear. And the same with clothing. And we had a wonderful seamstress where I eventually learned all my sewing from. And she came to our house probably twice a year to make all my mom's stuff in better days. But now we had no fabric, we had no thread, we had no nothing. So this seamstress made now clothes for me out of my father's clothes. So the pants became smaller pants, and the pants also turned into skirts, and the jackets were made smaller, and his shirts were made into, match up dresses and whatever. So this is the time, and I should maybe I'll tell you that later. So now we thought, let me see what I don't want to forget things. So our little town had no high school. It only had an elementary school. And so to go to the high school, we had to go to Kiel, to the big city. And because the town was very small, we were maybe 20 children who wanted to go to high school, because you needed high school to have a higher education. And so in the beginning, we took the train, and the school system in Germany is a little different. You have elementary school, and then from the age of 10, you can choose either you go to high school or you go to a to a trade school, yeah, and you learn a trade, like electricity or whatever, cabinet making, whatever you wanted to learn. But for us who wanted to go a little further than that, we in the beginning took the train to Kiel, and very often, the trucks were bombed out and we couldn't get home. And it was about 18 kilometers from my home. And so the older kids then took us little ones by the hand, and we marched home and came probably home in, I don't know, middle of the night. Then towards the end of the war, of course, every railroad track was bombed out. There was no way we could get to school. It was now after the war, and we needed to go to school. So all of us, our 20 kids, we would stand on the bottom of the street and led from our town to Kiel. And we waited for a truck to come, because there were no private cars, to put us on the back of the truck and take us to Kiel. And dropped us actually anywhere where the truck needed to go to bring whatever he was bringing. And so from there, then we walked to the school. The school was standing, but it had no windows. And so we sat there, all the windows were boarded up, and they were probably almost the size like your big window here. But what was in the middle, there was a hole about the size of this paper, so that the light would come in. But it was no glass over this. So the wind would blow in and the cold would come in, and the Red Cross came every lunch hour to bring us a sandwich and a glass of milk. So that was often the only food that some of these, all of us children have. So let me see. The other place that we felt safe was at a church. Our town had two churches, one Catholic one Protestant one. And my father, of course, being very Catholic, but he was gone now. My mother was Protestant, but my father always said, you know, we bring up this child in both faiths. And when she's 16, she can decide what she wants to do. Now that my mom and I always went with my father to the cloister, and he very seldom, but he did sometimes come with us to the Protestant church. So after high school, you know, this was now, you know, the time goes on and on. Eventually they probably put in a window and it was getting a little better. When high school was done, I entered an Academy of Fine Arts because I wanted to be color. I always loved color and I liked fabric. And so I enrolled in a program that was textile design. With textile design came embroidery. And so what I have here to show you, it's very heavy, I don't know, it had 2 pairs of glasses in it. So the outside rows are all stitches that came probably from 1600, 1700. They're all stitches that had a name. So we have to represent these stitches that had existed for hundreds of years. But the middle row are things that I had to design myself. So the middle row is my design. Now I put it over here and you can see it later on. Your creation. And one day we had a competition, you know, every church, everything was bombed out, and so they slowly tried to rebuild it. And we had a competition of designing and making a flag for the church. So lucky me, I was chosen, my design was chosen, and I made this flag for this church that is still flying out. Wow. And you can see her in here today. It was huge, like, you know, they're mostly what, 6, 7, 8 feet long. Yeah. And then we come to the time that that's probably the worst day of my life. I was 19 years old and my mother died. So suddenly I was all alone. I never really learned how to cook or clean, or I didn't know anything. We were very protected. And also we had no food, so she couldn't really teach me how to cook. And what I did after that is I went to the cemetery a couple of times a week and I would talk to her and hope that she would tell me what I should do. So I better get a key next time. Somewhere. It really changed my whole life. So I was lucky because our chauffeur who still lived next door to us, and they sort of helped me a little bit along so that I wasn't totally wasted. So I finished the Academy of Fine Arts. I did my degree in design, and mostly what we did was we designed fabric and we designed carpets and we designed curtains, and like Lisa has a fabric that is printed. And you have a beautiful tie that is printed. So we designed all these things. And now I'm finished with the school, and probably because I was alone, I don't know, we were all stupid at one point in our lives. I had met this young man at the Academy of Fine Arts. He came from the more lower part of Germany. He came from this part of Germany. He was different than the boys from my little hometown, and so I fell in love with this man. And at 21, I got married. We were all stupid. We should never have gotten married at 20 and 21, but you know, what do you know? Any one of you got married at 21?
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
But a good marriage.
So I got married at 21. I had my first little son, Michael, on 22. I had a little girl 2 years later. So her name was Amelie Antoinette, my precious girl who was looking after me every single day today. And then later on, 6 years later, I had a little boy by the name of John, because he was born on his grandfather's birthday, May the 1st. So we named him, my grandfather was Johann Heinrich, so his name became John Henry, which he may not like, but that's what he got. So my husband was his family was in the furniture business, so he worked with his father in the furniture business. But he also had an older brother who was very domineering, and he was a little restless. And one day he decides he wants to go to Canada. And I had no clue really. I knew where Canada was on the map, but I didn't know much about Canada. And so he took off one day I had now 2 children. One was 3 and one was 5. And 3 months later, I get this phone call and he says, I don't think I'm going to come back. He says, I want you to pack your bags and take the kids and come over here.
And choice.
So my father-in-law kept on saying, don't go, you know, you don't know where you're going. And, but, you know, I had 2 children. So I thought the children need a father. And so I packed a big crate, again, like this, with things that I wanted to take. And that's why I still have things from my mother, because it was very important for me to bring that. And I also told my grandchildren, who are, may some of them be on that thing, that I want it to stay within the family. It's very important to me. So we learned now in Canada with my 2 little children, 3 and 5. And we learned we left Hamburg. We went from Hamburg to Ireland, from Ireland to Montreal, from Montreal to Ottawa. And in those days, the airports were very tiny. Maybe some of you remember that. So we land in Ottawa, and then we have to drive to the little town of Maitland in Ontario. Maitland is right outside of Brockville, if you know where Brockville is. It's on the St. Lawrence River. Why he chose it, I do not know, but we don't know everything. It was February the 6th, and the snow was so high. I had never seen snow like that in my life. So this house he rented was actually 2 houses. One was a house, and the other one used to be the stable where George Washington's horses once upon a time stayed when they crossed the St. Lawrence River into the United States. So the people who had bought this property, they used the larger house for their, and then they fixed up the small house, the stable, and made it into living quarters. So that is the thing that my husband now rented. So we arrived there in the snow, and it's so up to here. And we come in, and the whole lower floor is one room. When you come in, it was just one room, and the tiniest of kitchen. It had probably a stove and a small fridge, a sink, and one cupboard or something. Upstairs were 2 little bedrooms and a bathroom. Had this beautiful garden right down to the St. Lawrence River, and lots of windows. And so now it is winter time, and we had no clue how to build this house. We went to the basement, and the basement had no flooring. It was all because the house probably was built 200 years ago. So the floor was all sand and uneven, not finished. And in the middle of that floor was this machine that we had to put coal and wood and stuff in it. So in the middle of this living room now, in the first floor, was this 3 by 3 feet hole with a grid on the top, where the worms are supposed to come out. Well, we really didn't know much how to work that thing. So we all sat around this square all the time. And what else? Oh, we bought television. We didn't have much money at this point, but we bought a television, and that is how we learned English, by watching TV. The children started learning English. I had had English in high school, but if you don't speak it, you lose it. And so my son had to start school in September of that year. He was now 6 years old, and he had a really, really hard time, because the kids, unfortunately, children can be very cruel. And so his English was terrible. His clothes was very German. He was an outsider. It's like when we were teaching high school, there were always kids who were outsiders, and we had to look after them. But so I didn't know anyone. We didn't have 25 cents to buy a stamp to write a letter to Germany. My husband was a dreamer. He tried to design furniture and tried to design other things, but never really brought in any kind of money that we could live with. And so one day I meet this lady who also had a child at the school, and she says, next door in Prescott is going to be a sale of fabric. She said, do you want to come? I said, oh, great. I didn't know the lady, she didn't know me, but she was advertising this. So I said, are you going to buy some of this, whatever we're going to see? And she said, oh, no, she said, we own it. So she now was great enough. She took me along, and we went to Prescott, and they made Hathaway shirts. And I don't know if you remember that word. And Hathaway shirts were made out of Liberty of London fabric. So all that fabric came from London, England. It was the most beautiful, fine cotton, sometimes a mix of cotton and silk. Beautiful prints, just absolutely gorgeous. So I got little bits and ends of fabric. And then she said, do you know how to sew? And I said, that's the only thing I really know is how to sew. So she said, would you make me some clothes? I said, sure, I will try. So from now on, I forgot her name now, but Betty. All the clothes that she wore from now on, I made for her. And at the time, as older people may remember that, at times we had little bolero jackets over our dresses.
Yes.
And they were knitted. And then you had little piping at the edges to make it really pretty. And so I knitted all these little bolero jackets and all the dresses were just as beautiful inside as they were outside.
Wow.
And so it's brought in $8 a dress. Well, you know, at that time, for $8 you could, you know, feed your kids with something. As I said, my husband didn't bring in much money. So that was the beginning of my sewing career.
Very good.
And one day the doorbell, don't knock, knock, and I go to the door and there stands this fancy lady in front of me in a fur coat. And I look out and I see this Rolls Royce parked in front of my house with a chauffeur in it. And I thought, who on earth is that? So her name was Mrs. Weber. And the Weber family owned about half of Maitland. You know, earthwise, and the biggest house in the middle of the park. And she was a very rough lady, but very kind, but really rough kind of person.
Yeah.
So she comes in with her fur coat and she only has her underwear underneath. And over her arm, she has this most amazing dress. And she says, I hear you can't know how to sew. I said, yeah, I do. She says, I went to Paris and bought this dress. It was made for me, she said. And it was a wedding, her daughter's wedding, and she said the wedding dress also came from Paris. The wedding dress is all right, but she says, my dress does not fit at all. Can you fix it? And I thought, oh my God, this was like $1,000 dress or $10,000 dress, I don't know. So she tried to sing on, and that's why she didn't wear a dress underneath her coat. She was ready. So she tied it on, and I knew now what I had to do. I had to take the whole thing apart and put it back together again, because it just did not, it was too tight on one end, too big on the other end, too short, too long, I don't remember. And so I finished this gorgeous dress. I learned so much about how the haute couture makes things. You know, the sewing is in a different way.
Yeah.
It is much finer than we learned how to sew. And after the dress was done, she said, oh, I need 3 bridesmaids dresses. Oh my. So there I was now with 3 bridesmaids dresses. And my English was really so bad that one day when I talked on the phone to one of them, I talked to the mother, and I needed this person to come for a fitting to the house. And instead of saying the right thing, I said, when is she expecting? Instead of saying, when do you expect her to come home? I said, when is she expecting? Well, I didn't know the difference from A to B. So I made these absolutely gorgeous bridesmaids dresses, and I made matching hats to go with them. Big brim hats. And I put all the chiffon from the dress onto the hat. And then it had a big veil coming from the hat that was flowing over the dress.
Oh, wow.
And this wedding was in the park of the family, and so it was absolutely gorgeous. And they actually invited me to the wedding so that I could see it. So the other thing I did in Maitland is the beginning of what I call volunteer work. I got to know all the the wealthy people in that town. And also I got a doctor, which today you don't get doctors anymore, but the doctor's wife always came, and I made all her clothes and her children's clothes and more wedding dresses. And the doctor said, we need some help at the hospital. We have a room, which is like a sewing room, where there are tons of bed linens and, you know, the robes we get in a hospital, they lose their ribbons and they lose pockets, and the bed linens were all full of holes. And he says, we need somebody. He says, can you come and help us? So I went down to the hospital and got stuck into this laundry room with a sewing machine, and I started mending all the sheets and all these robes. And, you know, it was an outing for me. It was a place to go. And after a little while, they had a gift shop on the upper floor, and they needed now little smart dresses. Do you remember those little dresses for little girl that had all the smocking on the top and then the little frills? Well, thank God I knew how to do that as well. And so they asked me to make little smart dresses. So I graduated now from bed linens to little smart dresses. Well, the time had come that my husband was getting restless again, and he says, we're moving to Ottawa. So in the meantime, you know, we had lots of other things, hospital, children born, and all that kind of stuff, but it's not important at the moment. We now move to Ottawa. And so let me see. Ottawa. So my husband did the, okay. So I liked doing something outside the house. I always liked meeting other people, helping other people. I was brought up like that. My father always said, you have to look after each other. You can't be always alone. You need to spread out and do whatever you can, wherever you can. And my mom instilled in me something. She always said, if someone pushes you down, you stand up again and you go on and you be proud of whatever you've done. So it's been with me all my life. Whenever time became very difficult, I always thought, you know, I need to stand up again. So we now are in Ottawa, and we joined the church in Ottawa. And I decided at one point to look after a senior resident. So we had a brand new or old, I don't know, for me it was new, a residence. It was called Island Park Lodge in Ottawa. It was a place where seniors, like we all have seniors homes, or end up maybe someday, with a group of women from the church, maybe 6, 7 women. We would go once a month to Island Park Drive, and we would sit with the older people. We would read to them. We would comb their hair. We would sing songs. We always brought them cookies. And so it became sort of a routine for us. And at Christmas time, we brought our children, little children, and, you know, older people need little children. They just cannot always look at old people. So I really enjoyed that. My husband, who was very tall and slim, then suddenly, I don't know how it happened, but he broke his back on something, either lifting or doing. And so he was put in a cast from here to here. And so I now had to go out and earn some money. And again, sewing was the answer for me. And I graduated from nothing to be a sewing teacher. So after maybe 3 years or so in Ottawa, my husband, now it is 1969. I'm now almost 40 years old, and we come to Quebec. My husband takes a job in Sainte Therese, not knowing from me that it was Quebec really was a French province, but I didn't know. And of course, I didn't speak it, even though in high school we did learn French and English. But if you don't use it, you don't know anything. And I really have to admit that today I find it very hard. I don't understand. So that's another story. So we are now arriving in Quebec. We were told because Sainte Therese is more French. We didn't speak it, but it seems all the people that my husband worked with, they were all fluently in English because everything was done in English. And so they said, well, the best place for you to go is to go to Rosemere. Rosemere is a totally English town, and it was at the time we had 90% English, 10% French. So I never met any French people. And so unfortunately, I'm really very dumb when it comes to French. So we arrived now in Quebec, and on the first day here, I am standing on the middle of La Belle Boulevard with my little car and my young son next to me. And I tried to make a left turn where Woolworth used to be. Now it is pharmacy. And I get hit, and my son flies under the dashboard and I fly backwards. And in those days, you didn't have that neck support in what we have now in the car. So I flew backwards, and suddenly I just couldn't move anymore. So the ambulance came, took me downtown to the hospital, and I had a broken neck.
Oh.
So now I come back home after a while with, I'm in a cast from here to here. And my hands wouldn't move, and my legs were sort of just shoveling along. And it was a pretty tough time, because we just had arrived here. I didn't know anyone. The children didn't know anyone, so, but the kids now had to go to school. My husband had to work, thank God he had to work and brought in some money. And I tried to get better, and the doctor recommended that I have a piano. You have a drink. So we got this piano from this family. It was very hard. It was in the basement. We had to get it out of there, but it was a lot of manpower, I assume. And it came into our house. And I now tried to move my hands, banging down onto the piano. And slowly, whenever long it took, I don't remember. I got the movement of my hands again. I still had that brace on, which then later on turned into a movable brace. I don't know if you're familiar with those. So I still had that. So one day somebody moved by our house, and I don't know if we were in the garden or what. And he said, I hear you know how to sew. So back again to my sewing skills. And he says, I'm from Laval Catholic High School, and we need a sewing teacher. Well, I had never taught before. I knew how to sew, and that was about all I knew. So I went for an interview. In those days, the Barwick Catholic High School, if you know where it is, it was in the middle of the forest. The road was not paved, it was dirt road. Lunchtime, we would sit under a tree outside, and it was just where a car full of ours stands now, that was all forest when we started. So now what happens is that and then I go for an interview, and then they say, yeah, you know, it's fine, you can teach sewing. But you have to wait until we know if we don't have somebody who is more qualified for this thing that was called home economics. Well, I had no clue because my children were not of high school at that point. So home economics was now a course that was half a year of sewing and half a year of cooking. Well, my God, I don't know what it is. Anyway, it was 1 week before school started when I got this phone call, and they said, we haven't found anybody, so please come and be our home ec teacher. And there was no textbook, there was nothing. So then we had one person who was also home ec teacher. Thank God she knew how to do all this. And so within a very short period of time, I really had to learn how to do it. So this was Barwick Catholic High School. We had beautiful sewing classes. The children were so respectful. They would stand up when you walk into the classroom.
Yeah. And that's.
And at Christmas time, because, you know, I never taught before, so I just now was confronted with 35 kids in front of my face. And so the first Christmas I was there, I made all of them a little Christmas thing that we did in Germany. It was just maybe half the size like this, had a base, was evergreen, and it had a candle in the middle. And so on the 1st of Advent, which we celebrate in Germany, I made probably 100 of these little things. So I hauled them all to school, and I put them on the table because every kid had a, you know, a seat around the tables. And I lit the candles before the kids walked into the classroom. And the classroom had no windows. The sewing room had no window. And so I lit all the candles, and so all these kids walked in and, oh, you know, what is that? So some of the boys felt a little uneasy because I asked them to take that little thing home to show the parents that, you know, the little candle. And we did fashion shows of all the things that the kids made in the classroom. At the end of the year, we had a fashion show where the parents came and they could see what we had done. And now comes 1975. And somebody comes to see me and says, you are in a Catholic board, you're teaching in a Catholic school, but you're not Catholic. So at the time, it was very important. And so they said, we advise you to go to a Protestant board and teach in a Protestant board. So that is how now in 1975, I come to Lake of Two Mountains.
A great moment.
So I will do one other thing now. I will give you a little break after this part here, because I don't want to talk about Two Mountains at the moment. I will tell you the studies I had to do to now become a certified teacher. It is now 1971. I'm 40 years old. It has been over 20 years that I've been in an educational problem. And I was teaching all day, and I had to go twice a week to Concordia University in Montreal to get a teaching degree. So the first book I had to read, maybe you know it, it's John Stuart Mill, and the title was Utilitarianism. Well, with my poor German, poor English, every book I had, every English word I didn't know, I put the German meaning over.
Yeah, that's how.
So to start university for me, I read every page at least 10 times until I understood what it actually meant. Because I had no choice. The only choice I had to take this philosophy course at my first course at university. Chloe is making lines. So then I did my teaching degree while teaching all day, while looking after 3 children. And so I thought, no, I need to go on. I can't stop now. And so I went into a bachelor's degree, and I did the bachelor's degree in fine arts because I really wanted to teach art. It was important to me that whatever was within me, that I came away from just sewing and did something more creative. So I now went into the bachelor's degree, and it was in art education. So whatever long it took, in 1977, my husband passed away. I was not, I was now with my children and teaching all day, running to school, and it was a really confusing time. So, as you all know, life goes on. You have to fight on, and so I finished my bachelor's degree in fine arts. And so I thought, that's not good enough. I now go on to my master's degree. And we had a wonderful professor who was teaching psychology and philosophy, Professor Gregoire, who became later on my mentor. And so I had to attend all the classes, again, having to teach, having the kids, whatever else. So my master's degree I did in art therapy. And I don't know how many of you know what that is.
Yes.
We have today a lot of art therapists, and we have a lot of music therapists. Music therapy is where you use the music to try to heal the mind of people. In the art therapy, you let the patient, and I go to that later on, draw something, and then I have to interpret what these lines, dots, drawings mean. And that is an art therapist. So he spoke now, this professor in the philosophy department, about children that no one knew what they were. They didn't know, they had sort of a name, but no one really knew anything about it. And that was autism. Today, we all know what autism is. We read it in the paper all the time. But at the time, in the early 70s, no one knew what it was. In the beginning, it was called childhood schizophrenia. And so they didn't know what to do with these children. They didn't know if it came from the brain, if it came from behavior, whatever. And so we talked about these kids, and I needed a topic for my thesis, for my master's degree. And so I thought, well, I don't know anything about it. I'm going to throw myself into this and find out who are autistic children. And so between now teaching and university, I now found a group of 6 or 7 children in a church basement in Point Claire that came there once a week for music therapy. And so I talked to the lady who was doing this program, and I said, you know, I would love to do some art with these children. I'd never met an autistic child, so it was at this point, I didn't know anything about it. She said, yeah, sure, you can come. So she gave me a room, and so the first day I came, I don't know how much you know about autism. There are verbal autistic children who can talk and speak, and then there are non-verbal children. So I was now confronted with 8 non-verbal children. And these children to communicate with you, they scream all the time. They scream and scream and scream, and then they run around the room, and then they hide under the chair, and they hide under the tables, and they hide a lot of times behind cardboard boxes. So first I had to get to know, you know, how can I deal with this? And I've done that. I needed, you know, I needed something for my thesis to bring some kind of power into this. And I have a book here, my red book. This is my thesis with the autistic children. You can look at it later on because it is public. You're allowed to see what kind of work they have done. It was very hard in the beginning because they don't like to be touched. They don't touch you. But when you had a pair of shoes on, like Judy here, with the shoelaces, they would take out the shoelaces and stick it in their mouth, and then they pull it out again. And so when I worked with them and I had crayons on the table, then they would put the crayon into their mouth first before they would use it. So it was maybe a safety thing, you know, to know that they don't die from whatever they were doing. So I worked with these children from September to November to December. And I actually got them after a while to settle down a little bit. And like in the beginning, all they did is take the crayon and they would scratch through the paper and just destroy the paper. And then afterwards, after 3-4 months, they actually made circles or lines. And they actually came to the point where they used a red crayon and a yellow one, no other color. So it was black in the beginning, then red, and then yellow. So now it's Christmas holidays, and I see these children now at the end of January. And at the end of January, in the meantime, you know, at least 4 weeks has passed. And the children came back, and I came back to the children. And we had to go back exactly where we started in September. We started with scratching of the paper with black crayons, but it progressed a little bit faster than it had done before. And so every day I went to them, of course, and I came home, you know, it was like, I don't know, 6, 7 in the evening, 8. And then I had to write down every time I came back all the findings of that day, because as you will see in my thesis, you had to record all the changes that happen every day in the children. So I now get my master's in art therapy. And because my husband had passed away and I probably needed it as much, a lot of things happened, and I thought, I was teaching children in school that had so many problems, and I felt I needed to help them. I had to find a way that the kids would become better people and I would become a better person. And so I went into psychology. I now put myself into a PhD program in psychology.
You were really looking for punishment.
Yeah, I'm ready for punishment. And so I needed now an internship to do this kind of work. And I don't know how many of you remember, there is a hospital on Pine Avenue. It's called the Allen Memorial Hospital.
Yes.
Unfortunately, what we know today about the hospital is not very happy. We know that in the 50s and the 60s, they did really horrible experimentation, mostly with women, with electricity and with medication and anyway,
Yeah.
it's a hospital that has a good name and a bad name.
Yeah.
So for my internship now, I needed to go to the Allen Memorial Hospital. And I don't know if you know, have been in a psychiatric hospital. Everyone has a single room and all the doors are locked. So only the nurses or doctors are allowed to go into the room because the patient would run away or escape from the room. So now I am getting there with my paper and my crayons and my paint, and I was scared to death. I go into this room and thank God it was a fairly young man, who was in his early 20s. And so the door gets locked and I thought, oh my God, I have no escape. I can't get out. I don't know. So I worked with this young man for, I don't know, maybe 3, 4, 5 months. And, we became closer and closer. Art therapy is the patient puts down on paper what is in their thought. It can be a house, it can be a person, it can be an animal, it can be a street, it can be whatever. So I can't tell you what this paper did because it's a private matter. But what I've done then with the drawings that we did for that hour, I took it home and then I had to interpret it in a psychological way. And that is how I helped the doctors to deal with these patients. So it was a tool, again, for healing. So now it is now 1984. I get now my PhD in psychology. Also found another husband. So on the morning of my wedding, I sent my young son with my framed, certificate, hanging now in my house, of course. I sent it down to my husband who lived in Montreal, and so that was my wedding present to my future husband. He had no clue that I was working on my PhD because he lived in Montreal, I lived in Rosemere. He didn't know what I was doing outside being with him or teaching. So there I was now with a PhD on my wedding day, 1984.
Yes.
So now I go back to Two Mountains, but if you are tired of listening, you can have something to eat and then whatever you want. What would you like?
Want to take a break?
You want a break?
Yeah. Would you like a little break?
Would you need a break to sit down?
So we'll take a
Meantime,
10-minute,
can-
10-minute break.
This painting I did in memory of my mother.
Oh, wow. God.
It has a little white dress, and my mother always puts me into white dresses, and it always had little flowers on it, and little buckle shoes, and so I don't know when I've done this, I actually won a prize actually for this one. It has my little dress, and it's a kind of paper that I use when you iron it, it makes all these wrinkles. And then I put lace behind it because everything she did was just to perfection. Then I put a pearl here because on Sundays she would put on her pearl necklace.
Oh.
But during the week she would wear her golden necklace, and it was exactly like this. Just shorter, it was like, fancy ladies wore them to here. And she always said that when I was little, I would crawl around on the garden in the grass, and I would always take it apart and find something that looked different. And so she said, I always picked flowers or something. So I put the flowers here. So this is my memory to my mother.
Beautiful.
So now you can have a little rest.
So we'll take a 10-minute break.
Go back now to Lake of Two Mountains. I probably had never been in Lake of Two Mountains, but I now knew where Lake of Two Mountains is. And as you all remember, the old high school was here on Oka Road. Was right over there in the corner on a
Corner 14.
close to the underpass or overpass. And I was teaching home ec. And I don't know if it was at that point or it came later on, home economics now changed. It was now half a year cooking and family living. Remember that? And the other half was sewing and housing and design. So the half year was broken up again into quarters. So I come now to Lake of Two Mountains. I drive along along Oka Road, and the 640 wasn't built at this point. So I loved that school because it was a little older, but it had lots of windows, and my kitchen, my sewing room, art room, everything had lots of windows, and it was a joy to be there. And the kids were still good in those days. They were well behaved. So somehow then they decided that we needed a bigger high school, and so they built the new Lake of Two Mountains High School, where it is standing today. What the architects did not do and ask us as teachers, what is necessary for you in that room that you're teaching? So when I now came to the new school, my sewing room had no window. My sewing room had no window. My kitchen that had 6 stoves running, no window. All the windows were given to typing, English, math, whatever. So this was the biggest mistake they made in building that school. And so I was teaching the home ec upstairs, the art room was downstairs. And after a while, actually not long after we moved there, I felt I had a headache all the time, and I never have headaches. And so it didn't get any better. And then one day the kids started, I don't know, vomiting or being uneasy. So I went to the principal and I said, something is not right. I was now in this room and I had a kiln in the corner firing at 3,000 degrees
No,
to do the pottery. And I had a chemistry lab above me, and all the chemical stuff came now through the pipes to my room. And the principal would not act to it. And so I actually had to go to the union and to the school board and said, you know, we need to do something because it's just so unhealthy. So I have a picture here of a man with a beard, and I wish his name. He was a caretaker of the school. And one day he said to me, the ventilation to your art room has never been connected. So now they got all kinds of people in who now connected the ventilation, and then slowly it became better. And we could actually breathe where we were. So we had great fun in the art room, but you know, at the same time I had to teach home economics upstairs. So when you teach homework, you also have to have the material there every time you want to cook something. And there was no delivery in those days. I had to go out and buy all the stuff and haul it up to the second floor. It was, you know, to be a homework teacher is not like being a math teacher or English teacher. It's a totally different thing. So with now, I was lucky in a way that our sewing room and the kitchen were connected with a door in between. Because part of this course was family living. And family living is relationships between people, relationships between you and your parents, you and your brothers and sisters, how to get along with people. And it also had sex education in it. You remember that?
only too well.
Yeah.
So I now had to teach sex ed and moral ed, which thank God with my studies, I knew a little bit more than lots of others because nobody wanted to teach it. And I was lucky because sometimes the sewing room was empty when I was doing the family living and the cooking room. And so what I could do, I could separate the boys from the girls at times. And I had a box, always a box handy where the kids could put questions in, something they wanted to know. I don't know if Kim remembers that. She was one of my students. But I had a box and the kids would put questions in. And so during the class, then if it's the girls or the boys all together, we would talk about these things that really were interesting to the children. So what comes next? Family living. And then one day, and Lisa will remember, one day we had the sad thing happening with the main family. I was teaching two of the main children. It's a family called Maine. I had two children in my class, and I know the one I know better was Elizabeth. Elizabeth always was hungry. Every lunch hour she would come in the home ec room and she wanted something to eat. So I knew of Elizabeth more than I knew of John. But I knew both children. And it was summer holidays and I was driving somewhere in a car and I hear on the news that there was a fire in two mountains and that the children had died in that fire.
Oh,
And the mother, who I think was maybe a little handicapped, I'm not sure. Do you remember? Was she? No? Anyway, she had a pile of newspapers, and so there was no electricity that day. She had put a candle on top of that pile of newspapers and left it there, and it caught fire, and all the children were gone. And so I went to the principal and I said, you know, we can't forget these children. And I collected money and I created the main scholarship. That was a scholarship for if a particular student who was either had done good jobs or had good marks. And the father survived the fire. He was at work. And so every year, Mr. Main came to hand out the scholarship to one of the students at graduation time. And myself and the students, we made the money for the scholarship. And one time at the Main family, and one day I was asked to teach moral education. Well, moral education was now totally different than family living. Family living was more one-on-one. The kids could relate maybe a little better to that. I don't know. Do you remember moral ed? So moral ed, nobody wanted to teach it. Nobody knew what to teach. Thank God to my background in psychology, I knew a little bit. And so there was no program for 10, 11 students. And that was the older kids. And so I was thrown into this moral ed class without a textbook. And I had 35 children in front of me. It was not like 20 children. No, it was like 35 children. And the children had a choice, either take moral ed or take Catholic education. Because at that time, you still had the division between the Catholic and the Protestant. I must say it was probably a highlight of my teaching.
Was this at Laval Catholic?
No,
or at
it had
LDS?
now moved from this school here to the new school.
Yeah,
We were
But it
now,
should be Protestant?
Yeah, the
Protestant
Protestant
school
schools,
there,
yeah,
yeah.
Catholic and Protestant.
Okay.
but the people, the kids who were Catholic, they
Oh.
would opt for Catholic education.
Oh,
yes.
At that time,
Yeah.
because later on it became the French board and the English board. But at this time, it was still a Catholic board and a Protestant board. But they needed to offer the Catholicism to the students. So you could take either moral education or you could take Catholic education. So my kids now, with 35 kids sitting there, and I thought, you know, how am I going to talk to these kids who are all teenagers? And a lot of them don't want to know anything on how to get along with each other and how to treat your mother and how to treat your father. And so I thought a good thing would be if each day I would go through the newspaper and I would find an article in the newspaper that would be good for the kids to understand. And so I made copies or I read it out if it was short. So every child would get then this article and or I would read it to them and we would discuss the issue in that article. And that's where I got the children interested into the subject. The other thing I did is that I asked the children to bring a little notebook outside of the ordinary books. And I said, I want you to write each time you come into my class, I give you 10 minutes and you write into this notebook, either something you hate, something you love, something that bothers you, somebody who hurt you, or anything you want to write down. Because when you are blocked in your mind, the easiest way to get rid of is to write it down. Once it's on a piece of paper, it is out of your mind, it is on that paper. You can either keep it or burn it up, whatever you like, but for all of us, you know, no matter what age we are, it's a way of getting through the day, writing things down. So in the beginning, then I said to the kids, and I said, you know, you can either not let me see anything you write, or you can put it on my desk and I can read it and I may be able to give you an answer. And so in the beginning, I had maybe 3 or 4 little books. And by the end of the year, actually, out of 35 children, I would say I had about 30 books that I took home every day. I read it, I tried to give them some guidance of how to get over something or the other. It was, for me, it was a great class. Most people hated to teach this class, but I really, really enjoyed it. The other thing I've done in Lake of Two Mountains is we had a vice principal at one point who came from Germany. And so he said, why don't we teach German? So into the curriculum, he now put once a week a German class.
Wow.
So I'd never taught languages before, but I knew how to speak German. And so we now had a German class. So I was teaching them the language. And one day they said, why on earth are we teaching this, learning this? Why don't you take us to Germany? And so a seed was sown, and I think I've taken those kids to Germany always each year, another group, maybe 4 times. So we always made sure we had another country to visit. Sometimes we went to London, Canterbury, Dover, Calais. I took the children to Vimy Ridge, which was very important to me for them to understand what Vimy Ridge is. And another time we went to Pisa, Rome, Venice, but always the center was Germany or Austria, where they of course speak German. So I've done that a few times. And let me see, and I did graduations at Lake of Two Mountains. All the graduations, I had to drive around, find hotels, and so anyway, going back to the German class, there's one thing I should say. The German Society of Montreal had a ball every year. A real fancy ball where you learned how to curtsy and how to bow.
All the etiquette.
Be, just very well mannered. So I had 3 girl students and 3 boy students who were interested to be debutantes. And so the 3 kids and I, we made these most gorgeous white evening gowns for them to wear. We made it all after school. And I had to teach the boys how to, bow their heads properly and all the nice things. So we have done that. And what else did I do in Lake of Two Mountains? Let me see if there's anything else I forget. Okay, we had the Oka crisis. Do you remember the Oka crisis in 1990? And I had quite a few students who came from Oka. A lot of teachers had difficulty with them, but somehow I could relate with them. And the Oka crisis was there, and I remember my husband and we stood on the bottom of the hill in Oka, and my kids were on top of the hill with their masks on and their camouflage, but I knew exactly who they were.
Wow.
And Alan Gabriel, who then became a leader of this group.
Yes.
I had her in my art class. She was one of the incredible art students that at the time I was able to, the Museum of Fine Arts in Montreal, once a year they had like a student exhibition. And they accepted one of the paintings of of Gertrud. So I knew her from all that time, and I knew how strong she was and how determined she was to make it work. So, and I think she's still doing it, right?
Still an
Alan
active-
Gibson, yeah.
Very, very
Yeah,
much.
she's there.
So there were wonderful families in Oka. There was the Barnsley family, there was the Gabriel family, what is it, Dasby,
Simons.
great people. Just, there was always a little distance, unfortunately. And let me see. German down. So when it came to 1995, I was now 65 years old. I thought it's time to stop teaching. And I talked to my daughter and I called her and I said, I think I'm done. I called my husband, I said, I think I'm done. And they couldn't believe it because I was so involved in the school. But the time had come and children were different. Children no longer were like they were in the 70s. Children now had their Walkmans, they had TV, they had enough food, they had enough money, they had, mothers were working, fathers were working, so they came home and nobody was there, and they had. So I felt I had no more energy to be a good teacher. So I retired from teaching in 1995. So the first big question now comes, what do I do now? I've been busy for so long. And so I met a man, his name was Ming Ma. He came from Hong Kong. He was a teacher of art. So I joined Ming Ma. He had a studio in Haute-Montreal. So I drove down to Haute-Montreal and I started taking lessons in watercolor with Ming Ma. And the first thing he said to us, he says, whatever you want to paint, people, dogs, horses, they are never brown, black, or white. If you see a horse, look closely and you see there's lots of red and green and blue, never black, brown, and white. So I came across a book. I was in a bookstore and I saw a book on horses. And I've never been on a horse, but I was so fascinated by these horse pictures. I thought this huge animal with the tiny legs, they can do so much. Excuse me. So I decided I am going to paint horses. So I went down to Saratoga, New York, where they had the horse races, and I took all kinds of pictures. And then I went home and I painted horses in a way that Ming Ma wanted me to paint horses. So horses, Kim knows because she knows my house very well. My horses are not black and brown and white. My horses are red or green or purple or whatever it is. And I found a gallery in Saratoga, New York, that then sold my paintings. And I must have made 30 horse paintings. I have 1 or 2 or 3 in my house. But unfortunately, the gallery closed. I had a call from the judging department in Albany saying, we are closing the door of the gallery because they have defrauded the artists. And so whatever money should have gone to us, they kept to themselves. And so somebody took them to court. And so they asked us to come and get our leftover paintings. And, I had to cross the border with my paintings, which wasn't always easy, because from here to the States, they were when they looked into your trunk, you had to have a good reason why you had paintings in your car. Anyway, I went down and actually then we received our money later on because the jurisdiction in the States at the time was that they put these two men who owned the gallery, they put them to work and they kept half of their salary. And that half of the salary would go to us artists who they had not paid. So painting became one thing. As you see here, this is a painting I've done, and it's made with a pattern, a dress pattern. From all my sewing, I had boxes and boxes of dress patterns. So I took that tissue paper, and this is all what it is. So I painted the tissue paper, and then it takes about 3 months to do this kind of thing because it needs glue on top. First I painted it, and you have to glue it to get the pleats, and this rope is this little lace is from one of my dresses that I had taken apart and I didn't need anymore. So I've done a lot of paintings. Let me see. The other thing I started doing is volunteering at the hospital. Montreal General Hospital. I went every week. I worked in the gift shop, and it was a great place to be. You know, you met other people, you saw it, merchandise that would help. Then whatever money we earned, we would buy equipment for the hospital. And after a while, I thought we have to do bigger things, so I started having fashion shows. And these fashion shows were at Ogilvy. If you remember, do you know the Ogilvy store in Montreal?
Yeah, it's not there anymore.
Yes, it's still there.
Oh, it still does.
But Haute Renfrew now has moved into Ogilvy. So Ogilvy was a very fashionable place.
Yeah.
And so they provided the fashion and they provided the models. But I had to plan the thing, I had to do the food, the decoration, the tablecloths, the renting the tables, the chairs, and do the decoration in the middle. So it was really almost a whole year, a program that started, you know, the registration, the whatever had to be done, it almost took. So the money we got from all this, then we could buy equipment for the hospital, either wheelchairs, tables, equipment in the dialysis department. So I've done that 25 years. What comes next? I have to see what comes next. My husband passed away in 2009. I had a really hard time at this point because when you're younger and you're busy all the time, like when my first husband died, it was a different circumstance. I was younger, I was busy all the time. But now at the age of, I was 78 at the time, I was now alone, and Kim, who helps me all the time, she's cleaning my house for me. She knows, she's driven Donald back and forth to, he loved the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. That's where I actually met him, and so Kim actually drove him there when he was getting to the time that he couldn't drive anymore. And so when he passed away, I had a really tough time. And I put myself into a yoga camp in Arizona. And I spent 3 weeks in the yoga camp. It was like a totally isolated area. And I don't know if you've been in Arizona. No? Arizona is a land of cactuses. So if you step away from your road, you're in a cactus field. So you must stay on the road because the cactuses just eat you up. You know, the pricky, and just. So I went to this yoga camp, they called it a yoga camp. Every weekend, there were lots of people that gathered for the yoga. And the other thing they hired was what they call a healer. You know, in the States, you have a lot of people that call themselves natural healers. They are not physical doctors. They have studied how to heal the body in another way. And so at this farm, this healer came, I don't know, 2-3 times a week. And I remember lying on the table and she put her hands all over my body, very gentle. And I cried so much, but I got all the sadness and the anger out of my system. I was angry with my husband that he had left me. I thought he should have taken me with you. I rather would have died with him than be left behind. And I had a hard time dealing with it. So all this, I was able now to express in this center that I was in for the 3 weeks, and it was beautiful surroundings, the farm, and it had roads, and she let me use the stones, and I moved the stones around, and I built little castles, and I wrote a lot of notes in those days. I wrote a lot of letters to my children, and I wrote down all the feelings I had, and I came back really a much healthier person. It was a long way to go, but you know, we found it on the internet, thank God for internet. And that's how I ended up there. So then the other thing I've done in Rosemere, in my town that I live in, I've done Meals on Wheels, like you all know about probably. I've done Meals on Wheels for probably 20 years, doing the cooking. Then one day, I should tell you that, one day my husband saw in the newspaper an article that said, looking for models 60 and over. And he sent in my picture. I didn't know that. So one day I get this phone call and I was asked now to start modeling.
How about that?
Which was really a great fun. And thank God my mother raised me in a way that you never spend money uselessly. She said, when you have $1, you save 10 cents. If you have 10 cents, you save $1, 1 penny. So all the paintings I sold and all the money I made modeling, I never spent it. So that is now, thank God, my retirement money.
Wow.
And hopefully I can live to the end of my days without having to worry about the next penny where it comes from.
Very good.
So that is my modeling, and I have, whoops, let me see where it is. The one that you may have seen is this one. It hangs in every senior residence
Oh,
in Quebec.
wow. Yes.
Never seen it.
No, I've never seen
I've
it.
never seen you.
I saw the picture with the
Yeah, this one,
when you did.
this was a lot of fun. This is, you can look at it later. It's an advertisement for secret paint.
That's the one, yeah, that's the one I saw.
The online. Put it
You
online.
want me to show it to you?
Yes, perfect.
Is that good? And have you done this one?
You can do it again. I'm not sure I got it. A bit higher.
Higher? Good.
Yes, I tried. Oh, I heard that wrong. Anyway.
Oh, and this one was very lately, you know, I was now 90 years old when I did this.
Wow.
And this is the casino in Montreal. The
Never
casino.
too old to get.
Yeah, that's the problem.
So I am now in the casino in Montreal, I see advertising, and I was trying to reopen the casino in Old Montreal.
Oh.
And this was the advertisement where we could go without a mask. That is what this was for.
One of the few people who came out of the casino with money.
I don't know. And the other thing I've done this beautiful painting of a polar bear. This polar bear is about half of that window. And it's hanging now in the brand new Shriners Hospital. And it's on the floor, it's called the Arctic floor. And the Arctic floor is the third floor of the Shriners Hospital. And when the children come out of the surgery room, they go right towards my polar bear.
Oh,
So it sits right in front of the door where they come out.
beautiful.
And last week I brought them more things. So. Oh, here are some of the. From the fashion shows or the programs that I made for the fashion shows. So I still have them. So that is also, you know, long time ago. So you can look at them later on. So let me see if I've forgotten something.
How about the time you did all the volunteer work at the hospital?
I have
Yeah,
done
the volunteer.
25 years of that. I've done 20 years of Meals on Wheels. And the other thing I've done recently is the dialysis department at the Montreal General Hospital. We repainted the whole room and we bought new furniture for the waiting room for the dialysis. And I put my paintings all over the wall. And so it looks like a very happy room right now.
Oh, nice. Cool.
And so before I come to the end, I will show you this. This is my Medal of Honor. That I got from the Governor General of Canada for almost 50 years of volunteering. It was Madame Clarkson that I had to do my curtsy at the Governor home in Ottawa. So
What year was that?
this was 2005.
2009. Wow.
So I've come now to the end of my, you can do it later. Do it later, please. And, you know, I'm still around, I'm 91, I'm still around. I don't always have the energy that I used to have. Tim still comes and cleans my house for me. And I have done this today and I memorized all these things, so I'm very. I just like to say to all of you is that the darkness is always with us. But we always have to look, even if it's the tiniest of light. You need to not stay in the dark corner. Always find a little light, a little hope, a little something that makes it better for the next moment or for the next day. And if you have problems, write it down, burn it up. But when you write something, it comes out of your body onto something else, and it's away from you. These are books that my friend who was here, she wrote the book and I designed the cover for it.
Yes.
Oh,
So-
voice. Beautiful.
but it's in French, so it's, I can't read it, you can't read it.
They're in, one's bilingual.
Is it?
Yes, one.
I don't know if I've forgotten something. If you want to see my thesis, it's here. I would like to read to you. What did I do with my notes? Did I put my notes somewhere? Thank you, Donna. Yes, there has to be a brown paper. I find the older I get, I think a lot about my mother. And I think about her because I am so at awe at someone who was born at the end of the 1800s. To learn, she learned English, she learned French, she ran a household, she raised me. To me, it's just incredible because they had really so little things to work with, and she did all that effort. And I wish she was here today that I can tell her how much I appreciate all the things she has done. So when I was in Ottawa in 1969 with the senior residents that I went to, and I found, when I was looking through all these notes, I found from 1969, this is a note that one of the older ladies wrote on Mother's Day. And since this is the celebration of women today, I would like to read this to you. This lady probably was 90 years old or more when she wrote this. It says, a tribute to mothers. Next Sunday, we celebrate Mother's Day. It's a day set aside to honor all mothers. Gifts are given to her by their loved ones. A mother is a person to whom God entrusts little children to bring them up and to guide them in the way they should go. And with her loving kindness, her mother represents flowers in springtime. The tulip stands for memories of her sweet and thoughtful ways. The daffodils recall to mind her courage and cheer as she helps us along life's way. Her smile is like a rose. The forget-me-nots are the love she has for all of us, and her tender hands so worn out from all the laundry and all the cooking that she has done. I am sure we all remember the cookie jar, always filled with our favorite cookies. Our mother was never too tired to listen to us and to our troubles. It's an honor to be a mother. God's greatest gift to all us is all the little children. Let us be thankful that we have had honor and remember her not only on Mother's Day, but all year through. May we live our lives that our sons and daughters may have pleasant memory of us and we pass on and no longer with them. May we all say a wee prayer for each other in this room. There is no prayer God does not hear, nor faith that will not conquer fear. For prayer is like a candle bright, whose glow brings comfort in the night. And with that, thank you for listening.
It's inspirational. Yes.
So now you can ask me questions and I can sit down.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to stop the recording, but thank you so very much. I got full of nice things too in the chat that I'll send you online, and people
Okay.
really, really appreciated it.
Thanks.